I used to be the girl you looked straight through, just a pair of hands holding a tray, while other people made decisions that shaped the world. And somehow that same girl ended up standing in front of a vault in Switzerland that could kill her if she turned one dial wrong. None of it started with spies or guns or anything glamorous. It started with broken champagne glasses on the floor of a New York rooftop bar, and one moment when I was just too tired of swallowing my own voice. My name is Sophia Cross, and if you've ever been underestimated for so long that you almost started believing it, you're probably going to recognize pieces of yourself in this. You know what I mean? Back then, I worked nights at the Obsidian, a black glass box perched over Manhattan, where bankers, billionaires, and bored rich kids came to feel important, and people like me made sure their drinks stayed full. They called me the Ghost, because I was good at being invisible, sliding between tables, catching spills before they hit the floor, never interrupting the performance. One Friday, my feet already numb in cheap heels, I was walking past a booth full of finance guys with a tray of crystal flutes, doing that broke math in my head. If table 7 tips, well, Dad's meds are covered if not something gets cut. When it happened. Brad Sterling, hedge fund prince and human microphone, swung his arm wide to punctuate some story about his quarterly win. His elbow smashed into my tray, champagne arced through the air and exploded on the marble. For a heartbeat, there was just the music, and then it dropped out, and all I could hear was my pulse and the sound of glass rolling. Brad leapt up like I'd stabbed him. "You clumsy idiot!" he barked, patting at his suit. "Do you know how much this jacket costs? It's worth more than your whole life." And his buddies laughed like that was objectively hilarious. My hands shook around the tray, but rent doesn't care about your feelings, so I kept my eyes down and said, "I'm sorry, sir, you hit the tray. Let me grab some towels." Before I could move, I smelled that sharp cologne, and our floor manager Silas slid in with his professional smile. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Sterling?" he asked. Brad didn't miss a beat. "Yeah, there's a problem. Your girl just doused me." I tried quietly. He hit the tray. I was standing still, and Silas leaned close enough that only I could hear him, and murmured, "If you like having a job, you stop talking now." Then straightened and told Brad the meal would be comped and that I would be dealt with. He sent me to the kitchen like a misbehaving kid. Behind the swinging doors, the noise of the line swallowed the humiliation a little. I grabbed a rag, started scrubbing my apron, and Marco, our dishwasher, looked up from his pile of plates. "Rough night, Soph?" he asked. I tried to joke it off. "Just got told a jacket is worth more than my life normal Friday." And he shook his head. "You're the only one in this building who does calculus on her break." He said, "You should be back at MIT, not picking glass out of your shoes." The part he didn't know was that I had been at MIT working on a PhD in cryptography and linguistics, obsessing over how ancient languages could build modern codes, until my dad's diagnosis, and the medical bills knocked the floor out from under us. Scholarships don't stretch to private care, so I came home, took the job with the biggest tips, and tried not to think about the whiteboards I'd left behind. Silas slammed through the doors again before I could answer. "Cross back out there, table 1 is opening," he barked, and the whole kitchen went weirdly quiet because table 1 wasn't just a table. It was the raised glass booth for people who made even our regular billionaires nervous. I wiped my hands, asked, "Who is it?" and Silas tugged at his tie. "Sheikh Kian al-Nasir and his people meeting with the Sterling Group," he said. Then leaned in, "You pour, you clear. You do not speak. If you drop so much as a spoon, you're done, understand." I nodded. When I stepped back onto the floor, the air had that heavy electric feeling like before a storm. Then the front doors opened, and he walked in. Keon was younger than I expected, early 30s, maybe in a simple, perfect suit, no flashy watch, just this calm, focused presence like the room was a chessboard, and he was already 10 moves ahead. Next to him was Julian Sterling, Brad's father, CEO of the Sterling Group, the kind of man polite magazines call ruthless when they mean dangerous. They moved up to table 1 with a small army of lawyers and analysts. I hung back by the service station until Silas shoved a champagne bottle into my hand and hissed, "Go." I glided up, popped the cork, quietly poured their glasses, while Julian launched into his pitch, talking about port infrastructure, return on investment, how his firm was the only logical partner. Keon listened, steepling his fingers, and when Julian finished, Keon said in a low voice that made everyone lean in, "Your numbers are impressive, but I am not just looking for a bank. I am looking for a partner who can see what others cannot." Then he pulled a folded sheet of thick paper from his jacket and laid it in the middle of the table. From a few feet away, it looked like the worst group project you've ever seen. Lines, circles, hexagons, symbols crammed into the margins. "My grandfather designed the plans for a new city," Keon said. "He embedded a logic problem into the layout and wrote that the rights to the land would go to whoever solved it. The land is worth $40 billion. Julian laughed, gestured at his team. "We brought engineers, lawyers, the best analyst in the city," he said, nodding to a gray-haired man named Hopkins. "This will be fun." "Then it should be easy," Keon replied. "Find the mathematically perfect center now tonight, and we sign. If not, I walk away." I finished pouring and slid back into the shadows like I'd been trained to, but my eyes stayed on that paper as Hopkins pulled it toward him and started muttering. He kept trying to fix everything on a flat grid, and every time he moved the center, something else broke. Water lines, load, balance, symmetry. After a while, he pushed his glasses up and said a little too loud, "Your Highness, this grid is contradictory. It's impossible." From where I stood, it didn't look impossible. It looked like it was screaming at anyone who knew how to listen. The so-called errors were spaced like they belonged to a curve, not a flat surface, and the empty spaces between the hexagons weren't empty at all. They were forming a spiral. My brain, hungry after 2 years of serving drinks instead of solving problems, started folding that imaginary paper into a sphere, and a point near the edge started lighting up in my mind like a target. While I was stuck there staring, Julian snapped, "Water," at his empty glass. I stepped forward with the pitcher, refilled his drink, and my eyes flicked back to the grid for half a second too long. "Is there a problem, miss?" Keon asked. My stomach flipped. "No, sir, just making sure the table is clean," I said. He didn't buy it. "You were following the pattern," he said, still studying me. "What did you see?" Brad rolled his eyes. "She's just a waitress," he scoffed. "Probably thinks it's a coloring book," and his friends laughed because that's what they do. That should have been my cue to disappear, but that night, something in me was too tired to play ghost. One word slipped out before I could catch it. "Actually..." Silas appeared at my shoulder like a horror movie, whispering my name in that warning tone, but it was too late. Keon tilted his head. "Actually, what?" he asked. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, but the logic in my head felt clear, solid, so I took a breath and said, "Your analyst is trying to solve it flat, but the grid's built for curvature. The errors he's seeing are like elevation markers. If you cut that paper out and wrapped it around a sphere, all these lines," I traced the air above the page, "would meet here," and I pointed not to the obvious center, but to the odd spot by the edge my brain kept circling back to. Hopkins sputtered about Cambridge and advanced engineering, but when Julian snapped, "Is she right?" he had to admit that if you accounted for a curved surface, the math worked. The way Keon looked at me in that moment is burned into my memory. Not like I was a cute novelty, not like I'd gotten lucky, but like he'd been searching for something and just found it. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sophia," I said. "Sophia Cross." "Miss Cross," he said, "it appears you are the only one at this table who can see what is in front of her." Julian tried to argue, call it a fluke, but Keon just folded the paper, stood up, and said, "Then we are finished here, Mr. Sterling. You do not have the vision I require." Brad shot up, furious. "You can't just walk out and take our staff. She works for us. She's nobody," he spat. Keon stepped closer, not raising his voice, and Brad sat back down almost without realizing it. "She is the woman who just outsmarted your entire team," he said, then turned to me and asked, "When does your shift end?" I glanced at the clock, at Silas, at the tray in my hands, and before I could answer, Keon said, "It ends now. If you are willing, I have another puzzle for you, and it pays considerably better than tips." In the back of his limousine with the city lights flickering across the leather, he told me the truth behind that paper, that the layout wasn't just some inheritance game. It was a security system for a vault in Geneva built by his father, and inside that vault was evidence of arms deals, bribes, and murders tied to Julian Sterling and a handful of very powerful people. Every engineer he'd hired to open it had failed. While he talked, he admitted something that would have freaked me out if I hadn't been in shock already. He'd had his team run a background check on me the minute I pointed at the right spot. They knew I'd been a doctoral candidate working on ancient dialects and encryption, and they'd already moved my father to a private care wing with the best neurologists, all expenses covered. "I need your mind clear," he said, "and I need you to understand that by getting into this car, you became a target. Sterling will assume you're the key to that vault. He will try to stop you." I stared at him at the city outside, thought about Brad's voice calling me worthless, about my dad sitting in a chair not recognizing my face. "How much?" I asked finally. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Enough that you'll never have to do mental gymnastics over a tip again," he said. "And maybe if we succeed enough to bring down a man who thinks a waitress's life is cheaper than his jacket." I didn't think long. "Show me the puzzle," I said. What followed still feels unreal sometimes. Hours on his private jet, with high-resolution photos of a steel vault door spread between us, me, decoding a dead language spun into the metal, while he calculated how far each ring would have to turn, us arguing over whether return to origin meant clockwise or counter-bickering, and then catching each other smiling, because honestly, it felt good to use my brain again. Geneva was gray and cold when we landed. At the hotel, I almost opened my door for room service, until I noticed through the peephole that the waiter's shoes were tactical boots, and I heard the soft whir of a keycard hacker on the lock. He came in with a silenced pistol and a line about, "Mr. Sterling sends his regards." I grabbed the heaviest thing in reach, the toilet tank lid, smashed his wrist as he stepped into the bathroom, took a punch that sent me crashing into the shower wall, and a second later, Keon blew the suite door open, fought the guy like he'd been trained for this, then dropped to his knees in front of me, hands hovering like he was afraid to break me. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, voice raw. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't just business for him. It also told us something ugly. Only a handful of people knew our travel details, and someone back in New York had sold us out. We didn't wait for our official bank appointment after that. At 4 a.m, we slipped into a service entrance of the bank Keon partly owned, rode an elevator down to a concrete corridor, and stood in front of a vault door the size of my old apartment wall. 5 brass rings, each covered in that twisted script, small vents along the frame ready to spray acid if I messed up. "Once you start turning, you have 60 seconds, Keon said quietly, watching his watch. My palms were sweaty on the cold metal, but there was no version of me walking away now. I turned the first ring to Origin, the second to Journey, the third past the symbol everyone assumed meant gold to the one that meant silence, trusting my own reading of the dialect, the fourth to Betrayal, the fifth to Truth. For a few long heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the bolts retracted with this deep thud I felt in my chest, and the door swung open. Inside was no mountain of gold, just a pedestal with a box paper ledger on one side, hard drive on the other. Kian tucked the papers into his jacket, pressed the drive into my hands. "Guard this with your life," he said. That's when Garrett, his head of security, screamed over the earpiece that men with guns were pouring into the lobby, then went silent. We were in a windowless basement with one stairway and a building full of people on Sterling's payroll above us. Kian's hand closed around his gun, then around my shoulder. "I can maybe shoot my way through a few of them," he said, "but not all. You see patterns I don't. Is there another way out?" I closed my eyes and thought about all the little notes I'd made studying the safety schematics about the high-pressure tank that fed the acid failsafe to the vents. "If we rupture the tank," I said, "the gas goes into the ventilation system. It'll flood the lobby and force them back. The vault has its own air supply. We lock ourselves inside and wait it out." He stared at me for half a second, then nodded. We ran back into the corridor. He kicked open a maintenance panel. I grabbed a fire extinguisher and slammed it into the valve until the metal hissed. A sharp chemical smell filled the hall. Kian grabbed my hand, dragged me back into the vault, and spun the wheel from the inside. The door sealed with another heavy thud. Outside, I could hear muffled footsteps, and then nothing over the sound of my own breathing. Inside, it was just darkness and the tiny blue light on the hard drive in my lap. Sitting on that cold floor, waiting for poison to do its work, Kian apologized for ever bringing me into this. I told him he hadn't dragged me anywhere, that I'd walked out of the obsidian on my own 2 feet, that for the first time in a long time I'd chosen something for myself. In the weird little bubble of calm that followed when you're not sure if you're about to live or die, we kissed. Not some cinematic perfect moment, just 2 terrified people clinging to each other while the world outside tried to kill us. Yeah, that happened. Then the world remembered we were there. Explosives hit the outer frame. The door screamed, the vault shook, and finally the metal peeled open enough for smoke and men in masks to pour in. Kian fired until at least a dozen red dots lit his chest, and he had to drop the gun. Behind them, peeling off his gas mask, like a snake shedding skin, walked Julian Sterling. He had a gun, a sneer, and all the confidence of a man who thinks money always wins. He told Kian to hand over the evidence, and when Kian tried to trade it for my life, Julian laughed. "She's a witness," he said, "and she's far too clever for her own good." Kian finally tossed him the box. Julian gave the drive to his tech and ordered him to make sure it was real. That was my last fork in the road. I could have stayed quiet, hoped Kian or Garrett or God would pull off a miracle. Instead, I heard my own voice cut through the tension. "You didn't check the upload timestamp," I said. Everyone turned. I told him that while we were locked in the vault, I'd connected the drive to the internal server, used the bank's satellite uplink to auto-upload everything to law enforcement, and a couple of very noisy journalists, that what he was holding now was basically a menu of shortcuts, pointing to data that was already leaving his control. His tech's fingers flew over the keyboard. He saw corrupted file sizes, weird headers, news alerts starting to light up, and went pale. Julian's hand started to shake as sirens wailed somewhere above us, the kind of sirens that mean tactical units, not local cops. He raised his gun anyway, said if he was going down, he was taking us with him. The shot that dropped him wasn't his. It came from the top of the stairs. Garrett, bloody and barely on his feet, put a bullet through Julian's shoulder. Swiss federal police poured in behind him, shouting, "Guns drawn." Brad dropped his weapon and started sobbing. They hauled the Sterlings away, and just like that, the men who'd laughed at me over a broken tray were the ones being dragged past my blood-stained shoes. Later, when it was just us and the echo of our own heartbeat in that vault, Keon leaned over and whispered, "Did you really upload it?" I shook my head. There hadn't been time. While he watched the corridor, I had reformatted the drive, turned all the files into empty shells that looked like something but weighed nothing. I bet everything on one idea, that if I could make Julian believe he'd already lost in the court of public opinion, he'd hesitate just long enough for the world to catch up with him. That bluff saved our lives. 3 months later, the Obsidian wasn't a nightclub anymore. It was the Cross Nasir Foundation, a place where governments and companies send their hardest problems, where Marco runs logistics instead of dishes, where I stand on that glass platform, and people actually wait to hear what I think. Sometimes I look down at the polished floor and remember sweeping up Brad's broken glass. Remember Silas hissing in my ear, remember how it felt to be the ghost. And I ask myself if I'd do it all the same way again. So let me hand this over to you because I'm genuinely curious what you think. If you were in that vault, someone you cared about on their knees in front of a man like Julian, would you have bluffed the way I did, risking everything on a lie to buy a few seconds? Or would you have played it straight and hoped the system worked out? In the end, do you think there's a line between surviving and doing the right thing? Or do you think sometimes bending the truth is the only way people like us ever get justice against people like them? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, or share your own story about being underestimated and finally having enough. If this hits something in you, tap like so, more folks see it, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want more messy, real underdog stories. And next time you're out somewhere fancy, take one extra look at the person pouring your drink, because they might be the only one in the room who can see the whole puzzle.